The Miami Hurricanes finally have the talent level that Mario Cristobal envisioned when he got off that plane from Oregon 3 years ago.
You are Locked On Canes, your daily podcast on the Miami Hurricanes, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Happy Monday, if there is such a thing. I am Alex Donno, University of Miami alumnus, co-host of Locked On ACC and host of Postgame on the Miami Hurricanes radio network. And thank you so much to the everydayers for making Locked On Canes your first listen and your first watch. We're available free wherever you get your podcasts. We're free on YouTube. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by Monarch Money. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONCollege at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. On this episode, we'll take an early look at that Notre Dame game. We're just over a month. I cannot wait. Scouting reports on the newest Miami Hurricanes verbal commits. When you understand who our guest is, you will see why we need these scouting reports. Let's talk, though, about Miami's overall talent overhaul over the past few years as we are joined by the man, the myth, the legend, our boy Blue, LARRY BLUSTEIN. And Blue, you're the one who told me, 3 years ago, heading into that 2022 season, first year, Mario Cristobal takes over for Manny Diaz. You're like, hey, don't drink too much of the Kool-Aid. The roster, it is what it is. Miami's going to have some trouble. Then 5 and 7 happened. But Blue, how far has Miami come over those past 3 years?
Oh, geez. Night and day, obviously, and you and I talk about this every single year, Alex. So it's like we're fast forwarding 3 years now, but you and I've dissected this along the way. Every year there's changes. The first year, I think there were like 35, 40 new faces from the year before, and another 25 or 30 the second year. And then the third year, obviously, you may change. And the great thing, too, and a lot of people, I know a lot of fans are pretty hard on everything that goes on, but, it's the program really was from a talent level, from, an evaluation of talent, one of the worst it's been in a long time, if not maybe comparatively to the 70s, at some point. There was a lot of deficiencies. They were settling on, I'm not a star guy, but settling on the 2-3 star type of kid, which, as I said, you look back when Miami and USC went on probation at the same time, and Miami goes after Tracy Howard and goes after Duke Johnson, while USC was going after the 5-star linemen, which you could afford to make 2-star running backs better because of the fact that the line's going to open up holes. So, you look back to the first year, and there's not very many players that would even be in the 2 deep right now. I mean, let's be honest. I mean, your objective when Mario Cristobal arrived was to play for a national title and to be in the mix every year. And that wasn't the case. And I think when you and I started talking about it, we were talking about the offensive line. And I said, Alex, look at in the Pittsburgh game that they just played. They were knocking the offensive line back 5 yards into the running back. And I said, wow, so what's happened now is Miami, and obviously you build your fortress on the offensive and defensive lines because that's how you build a team. And Miami's followed that blueprint. And arguably right now, one of the top 3 or 4 offensive lines in the country, as far as frontline talent, the depth, with the recruiting last year with Campbell and Wilkerson and getting Buchanan and guys like that who you're developing now to be that next wave of frontline talent. That's how you do it. And the same thing with defensive line when you have studs up there like Bain and Messidor coming back. And I know that a lot of people at the ACC media days addressed Messidor coming back. And I think you and I, last time we talked, I said, it's great to have the Bains and guys like that. But when you have Messidor, who's played more games than anybody on this roster and has been around for 5-6 years, playing college football, it makes a difference because if you have guys who are producers but leaders at the same time, it makes a big difference. So to answer your initial question, the roster is morphed into one of the best, if not the best they've had 20 years, 25 years, maybe, because of all the elite talent everywhere, on both sides. And especially with the addition of 6 new defensive backs that weren't around last year, and 5 of them were elite type of defensive backs. Now you've addressed what probably was the sticking point to why Miami didn't make the playoffs last year. They knew every darn time that they'd have to go out, starting with the Virginia Tech game, they're going to have to score 40 points because the defense just couldn't hold anything, hold people off the board. So I think that's the biggest difference, that they've kept up with the times and also made coaching changes, which a lot of people don't realize. You have to evaluate a coach over that year. You can't just say, well, I know this guy. Remember how coaches are hired, and the only one that Mario Cristobal really worked with that's still on staff is Mirabal, because everybody else and Fell, who just stepped down as weight training coach. So other than that, all the coaches that he has on staff now are guys that he's heard about or watched from afar, and that's the evaluation process that they continue to go in every year. JT's done a great job on the defensive line. Obviously, that's somebody that everybody respects because of his knowledge, and it comes down to that Pete Rose of baseball. Just because you played the game at a high level doesn't mean you can coach it or manage it. And, a lot of times that's what you find. You're going to get these, like the Warren Sapps and everybody like that, which is great. But can they convey what they know to the kids? And that's what this entire process has been about.
So, Blue, when we talk about talent levels, people would say the measuring stick right now in the ACC would be Clemson, right? They're coming off their conference championship last year. Looks like they probably have an even better team on paper than a year ago with a lot of continuity. Now, ironically enough, Miami did beat Clemson 2 seasons ago. Like that did happen, right? But still, Clemson has become the measuring stick again. How do you compare Miami's talent level to Clemson's? On par? Do you think Miami has a little more talent, a little less talent? How do you look at Miami versus Clemson?
Well, the thing about Clemson, and you look at year in and year out, is they're not relying on a lot of freshmen. Their big thing is to have those 5-year seniors who stay. The 4-year seniors who, the guys who have been there for a while, and they don't thrust all these freshmen in by themselves. So any freshman that plays for them, or any younger player that plays for them, they're always going to be surrounded by guys who have been there for a while. So that's the only difference. If you look what Dabo Swinney has done, is he's made sure that he always has a veteran type of team. And that's important, because when you do that, especially in this day and age of everybody picking up and leaving after a year or two, or not being able to, guys running to the NFL after, when it's their time 3 years in, for some reason, Clemson seems to extend these athletes from day one. You look at the quarterback in Klubnik. He's the perfect example of a guy who's been there for a while, stayed the course. They're going to lose a player or two, but for the most part, I think that's the difference between Clemson and maybe everyone else in the country, because you look at Ohio State, they're a quick fix type of team. I think maybe the team that's probably more like that and they got to settle back in is Alabama, because under Saban, Alabama had that stability of having guys around 2-3 years, and they could afford to lose a kid like Cohen to Miami, but still be able to, sustain what they had. And I think that would be the only difference right now from a talent standpoint. I think Miami has just as much talent as a lot of these teams.
Well, speaking on that talent, let's get Mario Cristobal's take on it when we come back. And when I referenced, him getting off that plane 3 years ago, 3.5 years ago, I guess, to be more accurate, what Miami had then versus what they have now, we'll get that in Mario Cristobal's words. Plus, since the last time we had Larry Bluestein on, Miami has landed Cortez Redding at safety, class of 2026. Samorian Wingo at receiver. Want to get Blues scouting reports. You want to keep it locked right here. We're only getting started on this brand new episode of Locked On Canes. You ever wish managing your money felt easier? With Monarch Money, it can. Whether you're growing your savings or planning a big purchase, Monarch Money puts you in the driver's seat. It's like having your own personal CFO, giving you full visibility and control over your finances. Monarch Money is more than just a budgeting app, guys. It's a complete financial command center. You can track all your accounts, investments, and spending in one place. So, in addition to managing your money, you're also building wealth. When it comes to managing my money, yeah, when I spent 6 weeks in Europe, believe me, a lot of Monarch Money planning went into working out the logistics of that trip. And Monarch has helped me save money, guys. You realize how much you're overspending. For me, it was things like food delivery, all the extra streaming services. So take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONCollege at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. That's monarchmoney.com, code LOCKEDONCollege for half off your first year. Thank you for making Locked On Canes your first listen and your first watch. For your next listen, check out Locked On ACC. Kenton Gibbs and I will have a new episode coming on later on tonight. We're going to talk about all these rumors about North Carolina trying to leave the ACC for the SEC. We'll have the Locked On Tar Heels host, Isaac Shade, to help us break that down a little bit later. Locked On ACC is available free wherever you get your podcasts and free on YouTube. All right, so Blue, I want to play this clip here from Mario Cristobal. Now, this is a special clip to me because the question that prompted this great answer was asked by my Locked On ACC co-host, Kenton Gibbs, who, he mentioned to Mario, like, hey, how come Miami can never seem to get over the hump? They got this can't-write-itis despite always having the talent, is what Kenton said. Well, Mario Cristobal disagreed about the idea that Miami has always had the talent.
Well, first of all, I'd say I disagree with you with Miami's had the talent. I mean, we got here in 2022, and I remember, watching film and saying we got a lot of work to do. And I think this is the best way to put it, to summarize it. We were on a tarmac, and we asked the pilot to delay. This is a flight during recruiting and fundraising where Miami was on the verge of not having a player drafted for the first time in I don't know how many decades. And then finally, late in the 7th round, a player was selected. So that, to me, to that statement, Miami did not have the talent. And Miami had not recruited to the level that Miami is supposed to recruit. And now you fast forward 3 years later, now Miami is coming off a 10-win season. Now Miami is 6th in the country in players drafted, with double-digit combine invites, with double-digit wins, and with the #1 pick overall. So the steady progress and trajectory is a product of a lot of people, players, coaches, staff members working really hard to get Miami to where it needs to be. And one of the biggest reasons, and not the biggest reasons, why I chose to leave my place on the West Coast to come back and do Miami the way Miami should be done. And that's what we've been doing. I think it's evident in the players we have here today. It's evident in the progression of our football team. It's evident in the talent acquisition and the development of those players. And the way that things are progressing for our program in general, on and off the field.
There was one point that I hope Coach doesn't mind me sharing this, because we were off camera, because he knows how much I love Miami and I bleed orange and green. I went to the school and everything, and he's like, I want nothing more than to bring this thing back. He did that intense Mario Cristobal thing, and he made it very clear to me that it is his life's mission, Blue, to bring Miami back to the promised land.
Right. Well, if you remember the conversation I had with you about when I saw Mario for the first time when he got back here, and we met in his office, and one of the questions was, he said, what do you think the problem is here? Because he says, I see they get guys, they'll get a kid here and they'll get a kid there that everybody wants. And my thing was, I said, they're not coaching them up. They're not developing them. And he looked at me and he said, Blue, that will never happen under this watch. And you could see, he's been, really accurate. He's taking the kids, he's coaching these kids up. There's other guys who probably, would disagree. Well, you look at guys like Ray and people like that, who a lot of people perceive haven't, developed in that manner. But you know what? It goes back to saying that old adage is, it's not because we're not trying. And, it's not because we're not presenting them with the opportunity to improve. Sometimes things don't work out for the athlete. It's just how it is. I mean, it's not, it's not anybody's fault. I think he was talking more on a mass level and more on the big picture level of the team. Now, let's say we got 11 guys, in last class, and only 1 or 2 worked out. That's what I think he was getting at. How come, I'm in wherever he was, like in Oregon, or whether he was at Alabama or wherever, and he's watching Miami bringing in kids that maybe they were looking at too. And then all of a sudden, over a year or 2 period, several of them, not just one, but several of them never reached the potential that, and that's one of the things I think that he's been a stickler for. And that's why there's been coaching changes. Because evidently those assistant coaches that were brought in, Alex, didn't do what he expected them to do, didn't get, as much out of these, players as he thought that they would get. And that's why you still have guys around like Kevin Beard and guys like JT and coaches who've been, and obviously Mirabal, because what Mirabal is all about. He's probably the blueprint for developing. But I think that's the one thing that when, you look back at the interview we had with Kenton just now, or, responding to what he said, I think that if you look back from a talent standpoint, they didn't have those star rated kids, at the beginning of when he first got here. And you couple that with some of the kids that they did get that were maybe a little bit better, weren't developing. And that's why he came to the, the conclusion that they didn't have that type of talent. Because, talent is only what you achieve. And you could say, well, Alex Donno runs a 4.4 and he's going to be a beast. But if Alex Donno doesn't get, he can't pick up, things, and he's not instinctual as a player. And if you're a defensive end, you just don't get to the quarterback. Or if you're a receiver, you don't separate. That's why when you look at somebody like a Restrepo, even though he wasn't quote unquote his kid, he would have been the type of player that Mario Cristobal would have recruited, because you could see, he is taking things, everything that he learned, he compounds it by, when I told you the story when Mario, I think it was the second year that he was here, and he looked down and from his office, and, you could see the indoor field, and he said Restrepo was out there for an hour after practice, just running back and forth to the point where he had to go down and tell him, hey, you know what, turn the jets off,
Wow.
but that's what I'm saying. Those are the type of things that, you have to have in here. You could take it from here and then, put a little bit of your, your deal to it. But on the overall, you have to have those players. Just because they're rated by these people doesn't mean that they have the it factor to be really great.
That's well said. I'm hoping that the players Miami is currently recruiting are going to have that it factor a couple years down the road. Since the last time I had you on the show, Blue, Miami's landed 2 new ones, couple 4-star players, defensive backfield and wide receiver group.
Right.
Let's start at the safety position, Blue. And Miami needed a safety. They hadn't landed a true safety in this class until they got the pledge from 4-star Cortez Redding out of Jonesboro, Georgia. I like the fact that he's got a defensive back teammate also committed to Miami, and John Tavius Wyman. Maybe there's going to be a little, like a cheat code when it comes to the communication they already have. But what can you tell us, Blue, about Cortez Redding?
Yeah, very athletic kid. A guy who has cover skills with a safety mentality. He could hit. I watched him on tape 2-3 times. Very impressed. He's one of those guys. As soon as the play starts, he goes right at it. He doesn't stop until that whistle, and I like that. He doesn't give up on things. If you notice, there was a couple of plays where I think there was like a slant, and he got beat. And what happened? And he fell down. But he got up and he made the play at the end. And, to me, those are guys that, I want a million times. Somebody who, because that's why you look at tape. And I like to look at the entire tape. Don't send me everything that you show at a birthday party and he's making play after play after play, because that's not the true indication of a football talent. Give me the entire game. I'll see it. I'll see what he does right. I'll see what he does wrong. And I'll tell you what, the thing that popped off the page with him was obviously his physicality, but his will to play the entire play. And that doesn't always, sometimes somebody will get beat and they'll just let up, or they'll, make a half, ass effort to make a play. But that's the one thing that Cortez jumped off at me, and he's got some cover skills, and he's got a really, really fluid body to him for a kid. He's like 180 and he's about 6.5, 6 foot and a half. But the thing is to be a cover corner, it just takes a special person. But to be able to play safety, come with that mentality, that linebacker kick your butt type of mentality, but also have that, athleticism to be able to cover, and that fluidity of in the secondary. I think, he's one of those guys, so, as soon as he steps on the field, you don't have to tell him to keep going. He's going to go.
Yeah. And so a few days before Miami landed Reading Blue, they landed their third wide receiver of the cycle, SAMORIAN Wingo, out of St. Augustine, Florida. Miami beat Florida for his signature. That was the school a lot of people expected Wingo to pick before the tide turned in Miami's favor. And, from what I understand, Blue, he seems to be a pretty good balance between the other two receivers they already got, with Vance Spafford being, hopefully the next Restrepo type, the slot body type, and then Tyron Evans being the bigger bodied receiver. And then Wingo's got a lot of versatility kind of between those two in the body type. I imagine you probably watched him at St. Augustine before. What are your impressions of SAMORIAN Wingo?
Well, saw SAMORIAN as a 9th and 10th grader, and that at the beginning of his career, and we went up there to watch their quarterback, and they had a couple other receivers. Their quarterback has been just a major surprise at University of South Florida, since he came over there. So, getting an opportunity to watch him, in the spring during scrimmages, and then watching him during 7-on-7. This is a kid that, he moves. He's 6'2". He, close to almost 6'3" now. He's a big body kid, runs great patterns. Obviously, when you have a quarterback and when you have some really good defensive backs like they've had, and St. Augustine's one of those programs that usually makes it to the third round every single year. They did get to state, I think, 2-3 years ago when they had it up in Tallahassee, I think 2 years ago. And he was part of that. He was young at the time. But this is, Miami hasn't done real well in that area recruiting over the years. I mean, like you said, one of their coaches, Coach James, is a Florida Gator, former running back, and everybody, on that staff is, you're only right outside, like within 45 minutes of Gainesville. So obviously that's University of Florida area. But the thing that Miami has done with this regime is being able to go into Jacksonville, which they've done, and getting a couple of good kids. Obviously, you would have liked to seen them hold on to Hilton Stubbs, but, that was one of those situations there. They had him early on. But in SAMORIAN, the thing that, you like about him, he runs really good patterns. He's tough to cover because he has deceptive speed, especially as we were talking about when you get those really good cover corners in the ACC, and there are really good ones, from, Clemson, even Florida State's got a couple. So you've got to be able to bring your A game every time. When people goes, well, he can't do this and he can't do that. But look at every great team. You look at Ohio State, look at some of the teams that play for national titles. They've got a Jeremiah Smith, but then they've got a slot guy who runs different patterns, or an outside guy, or an X or a Y who runs different patterns. He blends in, as you said, to what Miami is recruited, because now Miami's not recruiting guys just specific. They want guys who are going to be part of a team. Like this guy does this guy does that, and I think he's certainly one of those blueprints to what Miami's doing, getting different type of receivers, to fill out this entire offense, and that's what you do. You can't get all the same. You can't get all little, Restrepos, or you can't get big guys on the outside. You got to have a mix of guys, and yeah, I think he's definitely one of the really, really good and sound, commitments in this class.
We're under 5 weeks away now from opening up the season against Notre Dame. I want to see what Blues' take is if Miami's going to win that opener. You want to keep it locked right here. We're not done yet on this brand new episode of Locked On Canes. Shout out to the everydayers. We have Larry Blustein with us, who does an awesome job on his radio show, 560 WQAM, the Sixth Ring Cane podcast he's great on, and Prep Red Zone Florida. All right, so Blue, and by the way, hello to the Crying Irish fans, because I've noticed there's been a lot of Notre Dame fans checking out the channel recently, which I respect, because, hey, you guys are scouting the enemy. We love to have you here. Larry Blustein, I'd love your early take on Miami versus Notre Dame. What does your gut tell you about how that game is going to play out and how Miami matches up with a team that was the national runner-up last year?
Yeah, well, Notre Dame, they return kids. I mean, obviously, quarterback-wise, they make a change. But anytime you have a guy like Jeremiah Love running the ball, and guys like Jordan Faison and the kid Jaden Greathouse, who come back with a lot of experience, and their offensive line is always going to be big. They come back with some guys who, that are juniors, that are redshirt juniors. Obviously, up front, they're going to be big, and they're going to be deep. And certainly that's what they've done, to make this team a really, really good balanced type of program on offense, where they run, they pass, but the quarterback's going to be the difference. CJ Carr obviously is a guy that had some really good looks. Kenny Minchie, they brought in Blake Herbert, so there's a bunch of guys offensively that make them really good. Now, defensively, lost a few players, so they're going to have to plug in, obviously, in the secondary. They have a couple of spots to fill, but it all begins up front. We know that from Miami. Gabriel Rubio, who's a guy that I watched a lot, nose tackle kid, a big, strong guy. He's going to be, he's going to be a problem. But this is where the matchup for Miami, with that offensive line that's just massive and experienced and talented, we're going up against some pretty good defensive linemen. I think that Notre Dame's front seven's very solid with the linebackers. That Jalen Snead is back at linebacker. I think he does a tremendous job. I think that Miami can win the war up front. And that's what I think. From offensive to defense, I think Miami's going to score points. And remember, now the big difference for Miami in 2025 will be the secondary. This secondary is night and day to what it was last year. Last year, the secondary, and I said it was horrible. Well, it was horrible. They had no depth. They had no frontline talent other than O.J. Frederick, who was a freshman, who really shouldn't have been, starting. He should have been in the mix, but not starting for, a team in a national, going for a national championship. But this year it's different. Miami's got some really good kids coming in. The Poiser kid, I think, is going to be a very high draft pick next year, if he decides to go out. You got Lucas, who, he was well worth fighting for, believe me. I mean, kid that I watched.
He's worth the lawsuits.
Yeah, well, a kid that I watched in high school. You look at Brown, who comes back healthy, and I think he does a really, really good job for him. I had a chance to watch a lot of those kids play in high school. At different schools in different areas. And I think Miami this year, with a linebacking core, especially much improved. You look at somebody like Wesley, he's grown up, 28-pound gain over last year. You have a guy like Popo, who I think is really, really good. You and I watched him, I think, a year ago at the spring game, and watched, I said, because I didn't even know that was him. I said, holy mackerel, he's got some really good size. So So he's the size you got. Kellen Wiley, like you had mentioned, players like that are filling in. And then there's no saying how good the defensive front can be. Because, I mean, you start out with somebody like Bain, who's arguably a first-round draft pick, Messidor, who's going to get picked because of the fact that he's a very talented, he's got a lot of leadership. The kid Armando Blunt is making some, fast strides as well, to give them. And then their defensive ends are crazy good. I mean, they've got a lot of depth there. I think this is a game that's really going to be won in the trenches, and I think Miami's got that type. You have a quarterback playing for the first time, but the thing about Miami is they run the ball. And anytime you run the ball as well as a team like Miami, you're gonna be able to keep the ball away from Notre Dame. Love is a big time back. He's a first round draft pick, and he could take it, as we saw. I believe in the Indiana game last year in the playoffs. I mean, he could take it the distance. He's that type of player. The Faison kid, who's actually nobody really recruited him. He's from down here in South Florida at Pinecrest High School. He went to Notre Dame on a lacrosse scholarship. He was an All-American, and then all of a sudden he showed he could catch the ball. And then the kid Greathouse, who came up with some tremendous catches, was at the Penn State game last year when they played here in the Orange Bowl. And they're well coached. I mean, obviously, another key, too, to look for is Al Golden is no longer there. And Al Golden did a great job. I mean, he did. I went up a couple of years ago, if you remember, when they played UNLV, my alma mater. I went up to watch them in South Bend, and you could see that he had Al Golden. There's guys that maybe not great head coaches, but they're really, really good coordinators, and he was one of them. Obviously, he knows his stuff. So that's going to be a big deal too, because where the terminology is still the same, a lot of that instinct that that he had in calling different schemes. Let's see, he may have been a problem for somebody like Carson Beck, who hasn't really been in the flow, but now with a new defensive coordinator, that could be an advantage to Miami.
Well, this is splendid information as always, and you get stuff like this on Larry Blustein's radio show, and he's got a new episode coming up tonight, Monday night on 560 WQAM. Blue, what time are you on, and what can people expect tonight?
Yeah, 6-8. We start the whole deal now with the NFL starting last week, colleges this week, high schools start today. This is the big deal for them. We're going to talk to one of the top recruits in South Florida, Trey Bell, who committed to Florida State 2.5 years ago. It's, like when Jordan Campbell committed to Miami, I think he committed to FSU. He'll be on with us. We'll talk to Adam Lichtenstein from the South Florida Sun Sentinel, talk about University of Miami, what he expects, what he's seen, because obviously the beat reporters are there and they get an opportunity, to see things a lot of other people don't. We have Media Day coming up here in South Florida for all the high school teams coming up this Saturday. So Brandon O'Doy from Football Hotbed, and then Chris Nee's going to join us, longtime reporter at FSU, and we'll talk a little Florida football too with Corey Bender. Tune in. I think you're going to like it. I mean, like I said, we have 6 different guests, 6 different segments. You don't have to listen to the whole show. If you pick out something, like if you're a Miami fan, which obviously watching this you are, maybe you want to hear what Adam has to say and a little bit of his perspective. And then Coach Flores, who used to be the Dolphins head coach, we have his high school football coach on. Dino Mangiero tonight as well. He's getting a foundation together where he's going to take a lot of these underprivileged kids who can't afford college educations and get them to the football, into football for, through his foundation. So it's a great show. Like I said, WQAM, 560 AM. And you were on with us last week and did an awesome job. And we got a lot of great feedback whenever you're on, because, I mean, like Adam and, like a lot of like Gio Milian and a lot of guys who cover this day in and day out, you guys have a different and a renewed respect and for what goes on. And I think you conveyed that earlier by recognizing, the changes that have been made, and that Miami didn't have that roster, and only you and I and I look back when you and I did our little pregame thing and did all that stuff. We kind of pointed that out. So, tune into us. And certainly it's every week, Monday at 6 o'clock on WQAM. And as the season goes on, we'll have a lot of great guests and a lot of commitments that Miami has as well.
It's the most informative show you're going to hear. Like if you're into college sports, high school sports, even pro sports from time to time, Blue will dabble. You want to check it out.
And baseball.
Tonight's and baseball as well. Thanks so much to Larry Bluestein. Follow him on X at Prep Red Zone FL. Follow us at Alex Donno. Make sure you guys make Locked On ACC your next listen. Also check out the Portal podcast with Brian Smith. He does a great job. We'll talk to you guys again next time on another episode of Locked On Canes. We are part of the awesome Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.